So today our topic is acknowledging our traditional owners. The timing of this conversation is really important because next week is NAIDOC week and this year's theme is Heal Country. Now, this community conversation is also an important commitment of Veterans SA in supporting reconciliation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and pay our respects to their traditional custodians and Kaurna elders, past, present, and emerging. So to share a little bit of history, NAIDOC Week celebrates the history, culture, and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. NAIDOC is celebrated not only in Indigenous communities, but by Australians from all walks of life. Now, NAIDOC originally stood for National Aborigines and Islanders Day Observance Committee. This committee was once responsible for organising national activities during NAIDOC Week, and its acronym has since become synonymous of the week itself. Now, the reason we have our esteemed panel with us today to talk about acknowledgement of our traditional owners is because I know that many of us are interested to learn more, but don't know where to start, or have noticed that in recent years, there has been increasing inclusion of Indigenous culture in military commemorative services. And I'm sure a lot of us want to understand better what this means and why it's important. Now, this panel discussion is for an hour, and there will be opportunities across the next 60 minutes to be able to ask questions. So if you look on your Zoom screen, at the bottom, there should be a little Q&A button, and you can put, that'll pop up and you can ask your questions, and the panel and I can see them as we go. We'll incorporate those throughout the conversation. Now, I just ask for those who are participating, when you're not speaking, if you can put your microphone on mute, because it's amazing how amplified just a little bit of background noise is. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our panel. So we have Shona Reid, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Reconciliation SA. We have Flight Lieutenant Steven Warrior, who is the Indigenous Liaison Officer out at RAAF Base Edinburgh, and Mr. Ian Smith, who is the co-chair of the Aboriginal Veterans SA organisation. So on your behalf, I warmly welcome the three of you to joining us today. Now, Shona, if I might be able to start with you and start at the basics, it's an appropriate custom to ensure that there is a welcome to country or an acknowledgement of country. Can you explain what the difference is and its background and why it's important to include a welcome or acknowledgement to First Nations people?
Sure. Before I get started, I just also want to acknowledge that I'm a Eastern Arana woman from the Northern Territory, and I have the privilege to live, work, play and grow my kids on Kaurna country. So I'm sitting here on Kaurna country with many people. Some might be in other areas, but I also like to acknowledge wherever you may well be. Look, it is an important thing, the acknowledgement of country, but also the welcome to country. The welcome to country is a really special moment, and I think there's lots of ways you could answer this question. I'm going to put in the chat box a bit later a YouTube link for people to watch by a gentleman named Jade Penny. He's from interstate. He's from the south coast of New South Wales, and he gives a wonderful explanation. And I might just take it from him that, you know, the welcome to country is very much around, you know, walking into someone's house. You're going up to somebody's house, and they're welcoming you into that space. They're welcoming you there. And a welcome to country is really important, as it gives a recognition and an acknowledgement as well, but a welcome that this is my place, this is where I have been, and this is where I live, and I welcome you into this space. And that can only be done by the homeowner. That can only be done by the person that owns that house, and it is inappropriate for anybody else to give that welcome. And so in this case, it's the traditional custodians we're talking about. It's the traditional custodians who own or have a legacy and have tended to this country for such a long period of time, and we have so much to be grateful for that, because we get to live in one of the greatest countries in the world, and acknowledging and enabling and amplifying traditional custodians and their right to do the welcome is a really important way to pay homage to that. Whereas an acknowledgement of country, anybody can do that. We can walk to somebody's house and go, oh, what a beautiful house you have. I acknowledge that you own this house. I acknowledge that you have tended and cared for this, and thank you for that. That is wonderful. And you know, I'll see if I can put it, I'm using my skills here now. I've just put into the chat box now a YouTube link to Mr. Kennedy's experience and his way he tells the story. He tells it so much better than I, but I encourage you to take 11.5 minutes out of your day to listen to Mr. Kennedy's explanation, because it is such a beautiful one, and it does talk about respect, it talks about responsibility, and it talks about reciprocity, which is really what we're talking about in the concepts of acknowledgement to country and enabling and amplifying welcome to countries, which is only the right of traditional custodians. Does that help a little bit, Catherine?
That is perfect, Shona, and you've set us off on a great footing or foundation, if I continue your house analogy. So thank you, and thank you for including the link to Mr. Kennedy's YouTube. We'll also make sure that that's in the show notes on our YouTube channel. So given that really clear and straightforward analogy that everyone can relate to, I guess it would be fair to say that if it's possible, one should always engage with the local First Nations people to be able to have a welcome to country. So and I guess then an acknowledgement of country happens if we can't have a traditional owner welcoming us into their house?
Look, I think it depends on what sort of event you have. You know, if I would, we have protocols that we developed for our own organisation, and I encourage everybody to have a look at how they'd like to set up some protocols for your organisation, or for whether it's a smaller group or a larger group. For us, we have engaged local community and Aboriginal expertise to help us design those protocols, because we really feel that it's important. And it's different for each location, to be fair, that we've discovered in working with right across South Australia. Important to sit down and go, how would traditional custodians like, you know, us to display our respect, and how do we want to display our respect as well? It's one of these things where we get to do stuff together, and that's at Reconciliation SA. And I suppose in the you know, in the spirit of reconciliation, that's what we are here to do, is to come together and find what can we do, and how do we best set out expectations and roles and responsibilities. And that's what we do with healthy relationships, and that's what we're asking in the reconciliation space. But for us, where we have landed is on smaller meetings. We do smaller gatherings, we do an acknowledgement of country, and we take that opportunity to show our gratefulness around who we are, where we've come from, and our gratitude, I suppose. That's what we've taken on board, is that's also our responsibility as an organisation, as individuals, whether we're Aboriginal or not Aboriginal. We've made a really conscious decision to you know, take opportunities and be excited about those opportunities to show acknowledgement. Now, as you know, we hold some pretty big events in South Australia. We make people get up very early in the morning. I know Ian's done that gig before, and Steven as well came this year really early in the morning to celebrate. But we go to great lengths to ensure that we have traditional custodians up on stage or at our big events to do welcomes to country. And we do that for a few reasons. One is we want to show our respect and provide a space where, you know, the wider community just sits back and listens. And there is a great opportunity for learning in that space. There's a great opportunity for relationship building, and a great opportunity to show our gratefulness, but also be humble in our space and enable traditional custodians' voice to be the only one heard in the room at that particular time. I learn something every time from a welcome to country, and I've listened to a lot over my time, and I think that's the opportunity that I look forward to, is to being a learner in that space, to learn the stories, to learn a story, to learn about a relationship, to learn about multiple relationships. And for me, it's a gift to be a part and to be an audience at a welcome to country.
Thank you, Shona, for that. And something that I have recognised coming from Canberra to Adelaide in the last 18 months is the richness in diversity of welcomes to country that I have been privileged to witness in a wide variety of events. And what I've also noticed is that in recent years across Australia, that welcome to country was traditionally done by, or appears to have been done by, the elders of the traditional owners, but now it's a representative of the Aboriginal community who they put forward. I just was wondering if you would be able to reflect, if there is a reflection, on what that evolution looks like, or if there is a difference of an emerging leader compared to an elder giving the welcome to country.
No, sure. Look, it's probably not my place to talk about how communities like to structure the authority, the cultural authority in that space. And I am no expert on that at all, but I certainly take my advice from the connections I establish with communities. So I go and spend a lot of time and invest, rightfully so, in traditional custodians, and there are many different traditional custodians across, well, the Adelaide region, but across South Australia, and investing in those relationships and asking who the best person is. And often I have an opportunity to talk about what I'm doing, and the different events that I run. One particularly is focused on stolen generation survivors, and I talk to Ghana around, this is the event I'm running, who's best placed to do that type of event, given there might be different triggers for people around stolen generations, or there might be particular words and wisdom that community want my audience to hear. So I very much talk about the content of my event. So it's one of these things where I'm fully informing community around what my event is and what we're doing, so they can best match from their perspective, from cultural authorities' perspective, who is best placed to be on at those events. So I go to great lengths to to invest in really wonderful special relationships where I can have some really in-depth conversations, provide all the information I can probably best provide, and then community come back to me around, well, this is the best person for you for this event. And sometimes it's someone who is older, sometimes it is someone who is younger. I do run a lot of youth events, and sometimes they want to nurture that. And I'm really grateful that whoever has been identified as the best person, that I get to work with them, and I get to experience a different type of welcome to country. Sometimes it's dance, sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's a spoken word, sometimes it's a ceremonial, whatever it may well be. I'm just so grateful that I've been able to include First Nations people in our event in that way, and in other ways as well, because I find different aspects in which I can include First Nation voice in other parts of the program as well, which is such a treat.
Thank you, Shona. And I guess just to wrap that part of the conversation then is recognising that Reconciliation SA has really strong connections across the community, across South Australia. If there are some of our participants in the webinar today who don't have that established, or even an early relationship with their local community, can you give some advice around how they could find that information and introduce themselves to then be able to work really closely with local community to achieve exactly what you've just described?
Absolutely. Look, we've been around. It's our 20th birthday next year, so this sort of stuff didn't happen overnight. It takes a long time to understand your place in this world, in place in our society, and then that's okay, and that's part of the journey, isn't it? Like, if you aren't trying to understand a relationship, it does take time. But I would encourage whoever's online, and I can't see the participant list, so I'm sorry, I don't know who's there, but I certainly encourage local governments and local councils now are working towards having First Nations connections, and lots have reconciliation committees or Aboriginal advisory committees. So your local council is a really great resource for connecting with your local area. South Australian Native Title Services is also a really great place. They have a list and a collection of and a connection to native title bodies, which is your traditional custodian bodies across South Australia, and they have contact details for chairpersons and council members in that space. So they're a very informative group, and they also have a website you can check out. But most of all, I think, apart from those very formal structures, get out to your Reconciliation Week events, get out to your NAIDOC events, keep yourself informed around what's going on in your local community. Go attend them. People will notice your attendance, and people will note that you're interested in Aboriginal affairs. So the last group, Cerise, is the South Australian Native Title Services. I call them SANTS for short. But get involved in your local community and what's happening there. If there's something going on in your local library, get along to it and check out, and you'll start meeting people and traditional custodians in that space. There are services that you engage with that do acknowledgements of countries and invite people to welcome to countries. Absolutely go along to those things. So I suppose my advice, if I was going to nut it down, is get involved in your local community. Be open to hearing new things and new experiences, and make yourself known. Go, hello, my name is such and such. I'm really interested in what you had to say. Thank you for doing that. We all love to be acknowledged for the work that we do. We all love to be acknowledged, not just financially through remuneration, because I think that's important to acknowledge that when welcome to countries come up, it is people are giving their intellectual property to you, and you pay for that in every other setting, and it should also be that you paid and acknowledged, remunerated in this setting. But yeah, introduce yourself, make yourself known, show your interest actively. That is how you make connections, and people remember you, and people remember your interest. So be proactive about that. That's my best advice.
There is a lot of advice in that answer, Shona. So thank you for that. And we've discussed in Veterans SA and with our community before is that that people can belong to more than one community. So we have our community of veterans and families, but they can also find place in their geographic community or in their pursuit of interests or their professional sector and line of work. So I think that's a really timely reminder about people can belong to lots of different communities and what that expression is like. And I also really appreciated your earlier observation around that you can't speak about the with cultural authority on behalf of other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people. So with what you've just described about how to link into local councils and the initiatives that they run, the South Australian Native Title Services, and we'll put that link in our show notes as well, then I think that's a really good reminder around who are best placed to provide that advice, because it is, back to your foundation point, it's about showing respect and gratitude, and that's a relationship of reciprocity. Also, thank you for touching on remuneration, because that is a question that we have been asked in anticipation of today's community conversation is around the appropriateness of remuneration, and the fact you've linked that to intellectual property, and we would pay for that in any other avenue in our professional lives is a really timely reminder around the fact that to be welcome to someone's home is not just a generosity in kind and spirit, but also that there is, depending on what the welcome to country, like the welcome to country itself, is an artistic and cultural expression and should be acknowledged as such. So thank you for raising that. At this point, I'm just going to make a pause. I love the fact that people are typing questions as we go. Are there any other questions from participants around welcome to country? I'm just checking my technology. Shona, you've already put it in the show notes. Thank you for the SANS link. Well, we might keep moving then and reflect then on acknowledgement of country then, which, as you pointed out, is can be done by anybody to acknowledge the where we meet and the traditional owners of that land. Now, noting at the beginning, I gave a an acknowledgement of country. So I'm just going to put you on the spot, Shona, and see if you can critique my acknowledgement of country and where I could perhaps improve that, particularly because I've been told, but I'd like to know for sure, that that people who do an acknowledgement of country can also inject some personal elements to that, and what's appropriate and what's not. Just to put you on the spot.
You are, but that you're right, because sneaky way you did send me that you were going to do this. So I did see it coming, just a fraction, but that's okay. Look, it's one of these things. There are standard versions that are out there, and we even have them on our website. And I'll somehow manage to do that quickly and put up our website up there for you. But it is a very there is standard and stock standard ones, and look, if you're okay about doing that, that's fine. Well, if you feel that you have an opportunity to learn a little bit more, there is, I suppose, looking at from your lens is really important around what are you grateful for, knowing the country. So the first step I would be doing, and is a big tick, is to understand what country you're walking on, and understand where you are. Like for me, if you noted when I did mine before, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but this is how I approach an acknowledgement is, I need to know what country that I'm working on. I need to know with what authority I speak. I'm pretty confident, as you can see, and I've been doing this gig for a little bit. So I know that I know who I am. I know that I'm a mother of 7 children, and I grow them on this country. And I know I grow them on Ghana, but I also know that I'm a guest to Ghana. I know that my country is from Northern Territory. Do you know, as a listener, where your country was from? Where were you born? What country were you born on? What country did you live on when you were growing up? I think it's really important that acknowledgement country isn't just a set of words, it's a learning about your life as well. I grew up also on Ghana country, but in a different part, and not the Ghana Plains, Ghana. I grew up in the northern part of Ghana, on the northern belt in South Australia, in wheat country. Little Gladstone, Laura way, if there's any there, wave at me. So I know my travels in this world. Do you know your travels? Do you know where you have travelled in Australia, and the countries you've walked on? Do you know the footprints that you've left? Were they heavy or soft footprints? Like for me, I think understanding where your travels have been is an important part of an acknowledgement. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I think one of the biggest lessons we can learn is to take a bit of a reflection about what countries have we walked on, what impact have I had on those countries, what did I do at that time on that, and how would I like my acknowledgement to be received? It's a reciprocity thing. So you're welcomed onto a country, then you need to acknowledge that you've been on country. What sort of message do you want to send back to the listener in that space, and how would you like to influence them? Are you teaching people who are listening to you, and are they receptive to that? I think it's all a really important thing. It's not part of housekeeping. We do the housekeeping, that's turn off your phones and we're there at the toilets. Acknowledgement of country is not a part of your housekeeping in your agenda. We are a living culture. I would avoid using things that talk about us in the past. We are present, we are with you today. Community are here, and it's a living culture that we are. I think it's really important also to acknowledge your terminology and think about how you'd like to. If you noticed, I use the word First Nations because that's how I like to be referred, but it's also in my conversations and experiences how communities have asked me to refer. It might be that you need to establish that knowledge and research and ask community members how they, how in a general sense, they might not even like to be referred to as First Nations. It might be Ghana just on itself, or Narranderi, or Nudgeri, whatever it might well be. Talk with your local community around how an acknowledgement might sit with them. And also, I think spending some time thinking about, from a very personal perspective, what you're grateful for, and including that in an acknowledgement, because I'm grateful that I can live, work and play on Ghana, because that's what makes my life so special, live, working and playing here. So that's how I shape mine, and I hope that's just a kickstart of thinking. It's an intimate process. It's something I ask you to do on your own. I know that I do workshops with people around gratefulness puzzles. I know it sounds something fun for kids to do, but have an opportunity to do a gratefulness puzzle amongst yourself. And if I might be able to send you something after, Catherine, that it's just literally a picture of a puzzle that you can colour in and do some colour therapy. But there's an opportunity to do that bit of reflection. So I think, there's lots more to talk about, and I'm happy to talk to others outside if they really want to go into a bit more depth.
Oh, thank you, Shona, and certainly you've inspired me to be courageous and to be more personal in my reflection, which I hope the community will see those well-meaning and good intentions going forward, but taking on some of your advice and that self-awareness and reflection piece. So thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question, and that is sort of linked to that. Recognizing, so knowing what country we are walking upon is an incredibly, foundational, essential part of acknowledgement to country, but recognizing that increasingly we're doing our work through video conferencing. Globalization is even more global now. How do we acknowledge the land that others walk upon, particularly if we're not sure where our participants are, like today, and how to do that acknowledgement? How do we do that to be respectful and inclusive and meaningful, but also not then be and to be well intentioned?
Oh, sure. And I think in the world of webinars and Zooms and Teams, there is a level of disconnection us as people, but the strategies we can use the tools are out there. For instance, today, I would love everybody to put in the chat box right now what country they live on, and I'd love to have an opportunity to hear about the country they were born on. And I do that in all my Zoom meetings, and it's really interesting, people learning about where people have been, where they were born. It tells a lot about us as a community around how diverse we actually are. And if we don't know, there's a great opportunity to actually research that. And so you can quickly get on the internet and have a look at the Aboriginal maps. There's one sitting on our website that I think someone's gotten to before me, I think. So clever them. Oh, thanks, Ian. Get onto our website, or get onto some websites, whether it's Native Title Services or whether it's another, even the museums have those maps. Have a look at where you were born. Type it into the chat box. I was born on Gadigal country. I had from somebody earlier today, but I live on Kaurna land. Absolutely, ask people to put it in the chat box. Make it interactive, make it fun, and learn something about your fellow worker and your friend online. That's how I would do it online, and make things interesting and just mix it up a little bit.
So I think that's a challenge for all of our participants today. I'll do, just before I wrap at 2 o'clock, if everyone would like, those who want to participate and to answer the challenge you've just set us, Shona, which is the land upon which we currently find ourselves and where we were born, then it'll be really interesting to do that in half an hour's time. Now, we also have a question, so thanks, Cheryl, for you, Shona. So Cheryl says, I completely understand both processes of a welcome and acknowledgement to country. However, how many times at a ceremony or service or conference or function, Cheryl has heard an acknowledgement carried out. She's been to nearly all of these and witnessed up to 7 times after the first person has carried out an acknowledgement. So can you help us navigate that one, Shona?
And I think that's very much been up to the speakers individually who've gotten up and want to show their respect. I certainly think that when you start an event, it is really important to do a full acknowledgement, and the MC or the host would do that. And I too have to do, as protocol for me, I have to mention that I'm an Eastern Islander woman, but I'd like to acknowledge Kaurna and, or acknowledge at least the MC at the start, acknowledge their acknowledgement, or to, pay respects to their acknowledgement. I certainly think that's something which is increasingly happening. For me, it's for a very different reason. And for others, it might be for different reasons as well, but I have to, by protocol, as an Aboriginal woman, as a guest on this country, do that acknowledgement. And it might be greater explanation needs to be provided to the audience in that space. So it's very, so I know that's not a complete answer and not a definitive one, and I'm really, really sorry that I can't do that. But as I think it's important that if you're getting a big lineup of people doing that, isn't it wonderful that more people are acknowledging and listening and understanding the opportunity that they have to express publicly their appreciation and acknowledgement. We might get to a time where people, event orders, I do that with my event. I make sure that my event attendees are briefed that there will be a welcome to country at the start, and I asked them to thank whether it was Uncle Mickey or whoever it might be. Uncle Mickey was the most recent for us. Acknowledge or thank the person who did the first acknowledgement, and I too would like to pay my respects, and then moving on. So certainly about event preparation, I think is the key message there. If you're hosting an event, think about your event preparation and anticipate that people are going to want to do that, and perhaps give them some guidance around how you can do that in the shortest amount of time to allow smooth operation and running of the program. But as I said, I have specific protocols that I need to follow, and as any person who is speaking an event, you should do that by negotiations with the event coordinators.
Thanks, Shona. And that's both a practical answer as well as an inspired answer back to your very opening statement around showing respect and gratitude and that relationship of reciprocity. So thank you. Now, Steven, you've been patiently waiting there. Thank you, Shona. It's time to give you a glass of water and to move to Steven. Now, I recently attended the Anzac Day Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander morning service, and along with Kaurna man Robert Taylor, together you offered a welcome to country and also a smoking ceremony. I also know at the recent 24th Squadron Freedom of Entry march in the centre of town, that a number of Kaurna people conducted a smoking ceremony as part of that march, and that was first off that anything of that nature and scale had occurred, and many people have commented on the importance of this inclusion, but I think that I probably speak for a number of people is that we don't quite understand its importance and what the smoking ceremony means. So recognising it's increasingly included in commemorative services, can you step us through what a smoking ceremony is and why it is significant, and what we should think about if we want to see about including it in a military commemorative service?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, I too would like to pay my respects to my people, so the Kaurna people as well. I'm also Narungga and Guggatha as well, so I pay my respects to those people. And also pay my respects to any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women that are with us today. For our listeners that don't know what a smoking ceremony is, so it's a process of smouldering flora on coals or a heat source to then produce smoke. So because of the specific flora that's used, it's not just any smoke. So depending on what you're conducting a smoking ceremony for whether it's for health benefits or to ward off bad spirits. So the specific types of flora used for specific types of smoking ceremonies. I guess just following on what Shona had already discussed in regards to welcome to countries, for us it was about, okay, we're doing this, but how can we take that to the next level? For our people, spirituality is a really, really big key to our culture. And the way that we connect with the spirit world is by conducting smoking ceremonies and connecting with those spirits. So to be able to then conduct smoking ceremonies, especially through commemorative services, as we know, commemorative services are to commemorate the sacrifices for the men and women that have served at war. So by implementing smoking ceremonies, it gives us the opportunity to connect our current world with the spiritual world, and to also ward off any bad spirits and protect and better the well-being of all those that are in attendance. Yeah, in regards to the freedom of entry, a very important Aboriginal custom is that when you come onto another language group or another group of Aboriginal men and women, they would welcome you onto country. So you couldn't just walk onto someone else's country, you would be welcomed onto country. And a part of that process is to then conduct a smoking ceremony to ward off any bad spirits that may be with you in present, before then entering into that specific country. So that's a really big key as to why we conducted a smoking ceremony during the Freedom of Entry March. But it was interesting that out of however many freedom of entries that we've done in the military in the past, there was no brokerage with any traditional owner group, which is interesting. Being the traditional owners of the land, you would think that that would have been included. So when I suppose we sat down and had a look at the process and the scriptage as to how freedom of entry works, I think it was a really important factor to implement a brokerage and then I suppose gain entry from traditional owners, which is why yeah, we're really big on implementing that into the freedom of entry for this year.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for explaining some of the detail. What I found really interesting from what you just said was around the specificity of the flora used in a smoking ceremony, depending on what the purpose of the smoking ceremony is. So thank you for sharing that with us. I also then, I have a subsequent question. When I was at the Anzac Day morning service at the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Memorial, and you walked around with that offering. Some people responded by standing there, and other people actively enveloped themselves in the smoke. I'm guessing either are considered appropriate recognition of the custom that you are welcoming us to. Is there a consideration as members of the commemorative service should think about as you walk around and provide that offering of protection and connectivity?
No, I think that's what it is. It is an offering. I mean, it's really up to the individual where they would want to engage in the smoking ceremony and then, you know, I suppose put the smoke on themselves. That's really up to the individual, and that's why we do I suppose cover more the area as well as the individual, so that way we're protecting and then calling on the spirits to the whole area as to where we're meeting, because it's about, I suppose, connecting and having a deeper spiritual connection with the land, which is another really important aspect of Aboriginal culture. So by conducting the smoking ceremony throughout the whole area in which you're meeting, you're covering all bases.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And then recognising the what smoking ceremonies, the purpose are and what they stand for, and the generosity in which they're given. Are there any circumstances where it would not be appropriate to include a smoking ceremony in a military commemorative service?
I think it depends on each traditional owner group. I can't speak on behalf of, I suppose, other traditional owner groups because I'm predominantly Ghana. So whenever, I suppose, we're looking at commemorative services here, I leave it up to the discretion of the organiser. It's not something that has to be done, although that I do encourage it, because I think you're really, I suppose, from an Aboriginal perspective, you are commemorating, you know, the men and women to the best of our ability as Aboriginal people. So that's why I suppose personally I would like to see it embedded into commemorative services a lot more. But again, yeah, it's really up to the organiser's discretion.
Yeah, great. And as you pointed out, and Shona gave a similar answer to respond to one of my questions, it really comes back to that first relationship you have with the traditional owners of the land upon which you're going to be conducting that commemorative service, and what their wishes are, and how they would like to have respects paid that are culturally respectful, but also recognising the reciprocity of relationship of the gratitude that organisers want to show as well. So thank you. I guess that then leads to another question around, are there any, speaking as a predominantly Ghana man, are there other customs or traditions that some of our participants listening today could consider speaking to their traditional owners about including in commemorative services? So beyond the smoking ceremony and the welcome to country that we've already discussed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's another really good point about I suppose our culture here is that it's so diverse. So we've got a whole different range of elements, from language to our connection with the spiritual world through commemorative services and spirituality. And then we've also got dance as well. So, depending on what the event or what the gathering is, if the organizer, had a specific theme, they could then discuss that with the performer or with the cultural man or women that they are working with. And then they could look at all those different aspects of culture and then embed that into the event to make it in sync.
Great. So I guess, again, that comes back to what Shona was saying. It starts with the dialogue with the traditional owners and what you're wanting to achieve as an organizer, and how to be able to then appropriately respect the land upon which we stand. And then we'll take guidance from then the traditional owners.
And that's why I think that's a lot of the reason as to why we don't really embed dance into our commemorative services, because the way that we see dance is it's more of a celebration and a gathering, and that's why we predominantly focus on the smoking ceremonies, because you're commemorating, you're connecting with the spiritual world. It's not necessarily about a celebration, more a commemoration.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a really important educative point. And the other thing is, you mentioned around language as well. So this is a question for you, Steven, or for Shona or Ian, which goes back to a bit around the acknowledgement of country. Some people do an acknowledgement of country in the language of the First Nations people upon whose land they stand. Are there some considerations around appropriateness, or again, does it come back to that question of engage with your local traditional owners and Aboriginal community to see what they consider respectful?
I'll go first, and then I'll let Shona tap onto the back. For me, I'm very grateful to see non-Indigenous people speaking language. I think it's a really positive thing. But in saying that, I strongly agree that there needs to be a communication element there between traditional owners to make sure that you've got that acceptance, you've got your wording right, your pronunciation, and you've gone through that process to get that cultural acceptance to be able to then conduct producing that language. But yeah, I mean, my senior ADF officer spoke language as a part of the Air Force birthday commemorative service. But again, before he did that, we sat down, we spoke through the language, and I made sure that he understood as to what he was saying and how he was saying it. And by doing that, he had the cultural acceptance from myself to then go and conduct that language.
Great, thanks. Shona, did you have something to add to that remarkable response?
I know, not really, but I think, but I don't want to take it, because Steven's certainly does an amazing piece when he does his work, and it is absolutely wisdom. I love listening to you, Steven, talk.
Thank you.
I think out of this is really around relationships that you build and you invest in are super important, and how you do that displays your commitment to reconciliation, but also displays your commitment to a national identity and a shared identity, which is what we're looking for in this space. And I think it's I wouldn't dare go and speak a language if I didn't first understand where I was, didn't understand my relationship to that language and that culture, or even attempt to speak it just out of sheer embarrassment for myself. But I think that's the preciousness of this. It's a level of, there's a continuum around, if I'm going to talk from a really frank perspective, there's a continuum of cultural competency that we have as individuals, not organisations, but as individuals, and we can't hide behind organisations' competencies. We've got to own our own competency in this space. And when we seek out knowledge, when we seek out relationships, when we seek out language, it is a journey that we need to go on, and it is at a different level or different continuum. I don't like saying levels. Levels is a horrible word, but we're on a journey, or expedition or adventure, whatever word you like to choose. Go and find a thesaurus and pick which one you like, because I don't like the word journey, but I do love the word expedition. We're all on our own expedition when it comes to our identity in a place in the space we are. And it is an exciting opportunity, and I can just only encourage to get onto it, get your hiking boots on, put your backpack on, and start walking, and find a friend and a mentor that can help guide you through that. And we're very fortunate to have access to Steven and his wisdom, and other Kaurna leaders and elders in this space. And for me, that's an honour and a privilege, and I can just encourage people to do that.
Thank you both, and thank you for creating a really safe space where we can have these conversations, where I think that so many people in our community have good intentions but don't know where to be able to find this information comfortably. And for your challenge around encouraging curiosity and learning more about the country upon which we stand or travel through. I really loved your analogy around the impressions that you make, and are they heavy or are they light? And again, that's part of that expedition that we are all individually on and take personal responsibility for. So thank you. Now, Ian, I've got a question for you. Now, you're the co-chair of the Aboriginal Veterans of South Australia organisation, and I suspect that a number of people aren't fully aware of your organisation. So can you tell us a bit about the history of AVSA and the important role that you play in the community, and maybe what your plans are for the rest of the year?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. So I'm co-chair of Aboriginal Veterans SA with Uncle Frank Lampard, who is a Narrandjeri and Kaurna man, and was a national serviceman in the early 1960s, and his brother served in Vietnam. Frank can't be here today. He would otherwise be here. We basically operate as co-chairs, so not everyone's familiar with that way of doing things, but basically we think of reconciliation as being walking alongside each other, and the reconciliation South Australia model is they have co-chairs, and so when we formed, we decided that we would do that too. So I'm not an Aboriginal person, but Frank is, so that we get both perspectives whenever we're making decisions about what we're going to do, and we find that that's a good way of operating, and it's it leads to good outcomes, because we both get involved in whatever it is we're doing. He can't be here today because he's on the advisory council to the Australian War Memorial, and he's zooming with them right now. So fortunately, I was available, so I'm here representing us both. Basically, about 20 years ago, it became clear to a number of veterans in South Australia that there are a lot of Aboriginal veterans in the state who were not receiving their entitlements from the Department of Veterans Affairs, usually because they just were ignorant of what was available to them. They'd left the service and then gone back to their lives and didn't realise that they could be getting help with some of the things that had happened to them when they were serving. And that was started by the RSL here in South Australia, to the RSL's long-standing credit. And that did a great job of doing that task. But at the end of that process, sort of caught people up to where they needed to be, there was a decision that it was now time to swing around and do something different, and that is focus on recognition and commemoration of Aboriginal service. And I think that more people are aware of it now, but the reality is that Aboriginal people from South Australia have been serving in our armed forces since the Second Boer War, and in virtually every conflict, there's been Aboriginal people from this state serving, and they've been decorated for gallantry, they've been killed in action, they've been wounded, they've been taken prisoner of war. They've been buried in foreign lands, never to return to their country. And unfortunately, what has happened as a result of that is that they've served alongside their comrades at war, and largely they've been treated like everybody else. And one of our members of our organisation, a fellow called Gil Green, who was a 7 RAAF Vietnam veteran, He said, look, when I was in the army, everyone was one colour. We were all green, right? So that's how he saw his position as an Aboriginal man in the army. But of course, when he came back, and the reality is, this is the majority of Aboriginal people who have served in the past have come back, and their treatment didn't change from before they served. They came back to exactly the same situation as before. And so we felt that as a result of that, they'd been excluded from a lot of things that other veterans had been accepted into. They'd been stopped from hanging out with and comradeship of the fellow veterans and that sort of thing because of the laws of the time. Many cases they were just sent back to missions where they had come from when they volunteered to serve. So they were totally controlled about where they could go and what they could do, even who they could marry. And, they couldn't go down to the pub and have a drink with them or anything like that because of the rules of the day. And that really didn't change until well into the 1970s, and certainly have been, there's ex-service organisations didn't always do the right thing by Aboriginal veterans in the past, and that's just a fact. There's plenty of both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal veterans who know stories about what happened then. So as a result, we felt that it was really important that Aboriginal veterans from South Australia be given a place where they could commemorate their service together, and a committee was formed which basically arranged for the money to be gathered together to build the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander War Memorial, which is on the corner of Torrens Parade Ground. Most of you who know that area know the memorial. It's been there since 2013, and I was fortunate enough to be on that committee, and Frank was the deputy chair of that committee, which was chaired by Marge Tripp, who sadly passed away. But she was the first Aboriginal woman in the Royal Australian Navy. As a result of that, when that was concluded, we decided there was still more work to do, and there were lots of things that needed to be done to promote the recognition of Aboriginal service. And so we formed Aboriginal Veterans SA, and we've been going strong ever since then. And the sorts of things that we do are, when we identify, for example, we identified a few years ago that an Aboriginal veteran from Raucan, so he was a Narrandjeri man who'd served in the First World War, but had returned to Australia and then died essentially of the effects of the gassing that when he'd been gassed during the First World War. He was buried in a very poorly marked grave away from other veterans and off his country at West Terrace Cemetery, and we arranged for him to be returned to country, and great assistance was provided to us by 7RAR in doing that. And he now rests on Narrandjeri land at Raucan, which is wonderful. And we get involved in those sorts of things. Just this year, we arranged for the marking of another unmarked grave at West Terrace Cemetery of Herbert Millerer, who was another World War I veteran, and is in fact an ancestor of Stephen's. We try to do those sorts of things to make sure that Aboriginal veterans are properly recognised in the same way as all other veterans are recognised, and that takes a little bit of adjustment of the world the way it currently is, because we don't still have very much visibility about Aboriginal service. So that's what Aboriginal Veterans SA does. We've got a couple more unmarked graves at West Terrace Cemetery that we're going to arrange for a return to country onto Narrandjeri land, and also an unmarked grave of an Aboriginal soldier in Port Augusta, which we're going to arrange to have marked soon. So they're the sorts of things that we get involved with. We also run an annual commemorative service in Reconciliation Week each year, and of course the gathering that you were talking about before, Catherine, on Anzac Day after the dawn service at the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander War Memorial.
Great, thanks, Ian. And so how do people find out more, or how can they engage with AVSA?
Okay, so I've just put the email address in the chat. So if you email us on that, Frank and I monitor that email address all the time, And one of the things I was going to say about engaging with us is that we have Aboriginal people from all sorts of different countries on Aboriginal Veterans SA committee, but also we have a whole bunch of Aboriginal veterans that we know who are from all countries, not only in South Australia, but all over the country. Okay, so Gil Green, I mentioned before, is actually from New South Wales originally, and he lives in Port Lincoln. So we've got a wide network, and sometimes if you're wondering perhaps, well, how do we get involved in doing an acknowledgement in our town or our place, and you need a little bit of a guidance on that, then Frank and I and the rest of the committee are always very happy to help to facilitate that, and put you in touch with someone from SA Native Title, or talk to Shona and sort out who might be the appropriate contact for you to talk to in order to facilitate all that sort of stuff. And on top of that, of course, we've got a whole bunch of veterans who are from that country, and they can also give advice in relation to their own places where they're from. So in the chat there's the link to the Register of Aboriginal Veterans of South Australia. And basically, when we started AVSA, in fact, before that, a number of us were doing research into trying to gather the names of all the Aboriginal veterans from South Australia, and one Torres Strait Islander who lived here for many years and is on the list as well. And also Aboriginal people from other places that have come here and made this their home over a long period of time. So people like Gil Green, who's a good friend of Graham Corns and served with him in Vietnam and decided to move to South Australia and has lived here ever since. Now, that list, I look after that list as the registrar, and if you know of an Aboriginal veteran, anyone who's watching knows of an Aboriginal veteran, you can check that register that's on the link, the chat link, and if you don't see them there, send us an email, because we will get back to you. We'll find out what we can about that person, and if the person, if we can match an Aboriginal person to service, then we will not only add them to the register, but everyone who's on the register has their names engraved on the path of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander War Memorial. So that's a great way to acknowledge people's individual service.
Wonderful, thanks, Ian. And for those, just directing you back to the chat box, so that email address to engage with you is aboriginalveteranssa@gmail.com, and we'll make sure when we upload this onto YouTube that all of those links that you've generously shared are included in the YouTube show notes as well. So thank you. We've got a couple of minutes to go. This is our last opportunity in this forum, but certainly I'm hoping this has started a really interesting and engaged conversation that we can all continue as individuals and as a community. So if you have any last questions, please do pop them in the chat box. And while you're doing that, I have one last question for our panel. So this is whoever wants to jump in first, and that is around the appropriateness of recording the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander customs in commemorative service. So a welcome to country, or the smoking ceremony, or other customary elements that are included with permission and acceptance from the First Nations people. Is it appropriate to record that, or are there some considerations, particularly as everyone uploads everything to the internet these days?
I don't know. I was going to offer if you wanted to go, Stephen, as someone who does welcomes, if you wanted to go first, but I've certainly got some commentary on that.
Yeah, I suppose again, because I'm predominantly the individual that does organise a lot of our smoking ceremonies, a lot of our services, welcome to countries. So I make sure that the traditional owners that I'm engaged with are 100% understanding about what we're doing, who's going to be there, what media are going to be engaged. So that way, I suppose there's no surprises, and that then leads up to the person that's going to actually be doing the customs, whether they're comfortable or not to do it.
Yeah, and I might just add on from that, because it's like I said, it's an individual's and a community's, particularly intellectual property rights in which you're using, it's really important that they got full informed prior consent around all of that, which is an extremely important legal concept, and already also a really important moral concept as well that we need to have. I think the other part of that is, there has been instances where footage has been used for other acknowledgements or other welcomes, which is not appropriate. Each welcome or each acknowledgement, from my experience, and I'm certainly not an expert for a welcome to country, but from my experience, has been shaped specifically for that event, and it has been tended to and cared to according to that event. Any reproduction for another event would be something that would not fit anyway, but it has been done, and I feel very sad when that does happen. So I think, back to Stephen's point, your relationship, your conversation, your information, it's really important that you have full disclosure with your engaged parties, and make sure that everything's transparent and agreed to. I think it's really important, and treat things with care.
Thank you, Stephen and Shona, and I think that's a really timely reminder, particularly about, and I certainly know I do this, is that I whip out my phone without really second thought, and so that pausing of consideration of why I would be motivated to do that, and whether or not I am showing respect or have asked for permission to do so, is really important for me as an individual, as well as for organisations. So, well, that brings us to the end of our community conversation. I want to acknowledge the generous contributions of all of our participants who've put in the chat box the answer to Shona's challenge that she issued half an hour ago, of the land upon which people have been born and have traversed. And there is unsurprisingly a rich collection of lands of First Nations people which were listed there, and of course reflecting the fact that military service often requires postings across the country. There are some extensive lists, and I'm hoping that that certainly this conversation and that self-reflection piece you challenged us with, Shona, will spark some further curiosity to maybe go back and revisit where our footprints have been, to learn a little bit more about the country we have walked upon, perhaps with less consciousness than we certainly all now have. So on behalf of everybody who's tuned in today, and preemptively for those who will watch this on our YouTube channel, then I want to thank the CEO of Reconciliation SA, Shona Reid, the Indigenous Liaison Officer at RAAF Base Edinburgh, Steven Warrior, and the co-chair of the Aboriginal Veterans of SA group, Ian Smith, for participating today, and for generously all sharing and creating a safe space for people to want to be actively curious, to be able to more appropriately contemplate and include customs, traditions and respect of First Nations people wherever they may be. So on behalf of everybody, thank you, Shona, Stephen and Ian. And so that brings us to a close. If you have any further, if you want to continue this conversation, we'll make sure that we have Reconciliation SA's contact details, and we'll also reaffirm the Aboriginal Veterans of SA email address up on our show notes of YouTube, and noting that Stephen is part of AVSA, that might be a really elegant avenue to which you can ask some specific questions of him as well. So thank you all for joining us on Kaurna land today, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, everyone.